with a prayer. Don't you think that'd be a good thing to do?
I agree.
I can't do that everywhere, so I can do it here. So let's pray. Let's start with a prayer. Lord, we're grateful even in these difficult times that we have the ability to get together and study more about how to be people who are loving people in the midst of a stressful time. Pray, Lord, that you would take this session, you would soften hearts and allow things to be said by me and by each other that changes us in a way to help us to be more like you want us to be in this world at this time. We thank you for this community, Lord. Thank you for this church. Thank you that you love us the way you do. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Well, this is certainly an odd world in which we live now, isn't it? I've been coming to BPC for decades. I've known some of you. I've known Jody 40 years, believe it or not. You know that? I've known Jody for 40 years.
You're rounding down, I think.
I think I am too. But I'm trying to pretend like I'm not 65 yet too. This is great to be with you. I'm thankful for we have the technology to be able to have this kind of dialogue, and I would like it to be a dialogue as much as possible. We're small enough that if you have a question or you just want to make a comment, just unmute yourself and jump in like we always do, and it always seems to go well. Just the questions and comments in this group are always really thoughtful and move the discussion in the direction I think the Holy Spirit would have it go. So we're going to talk about emotions, as we always do when I come to BPC. I'm a psychologist. I also am an ordained minister and have an MD and Div in theology. So I talk a lot about theology and psychology, scripture, and emotional life. That's what I do. My examples are all examples from therapy. So you'll hear a lot of shrink stories today. That's something that hopefully you'll find helpful. I do think we need to talk about what's going on right now in our world today. How can we not? Just as we were starting off today, people were sharing back and forth that some are getting shots now, the vaccine is out. We're trying to deal with a worldwide pandemic that has certainly stimulated a lot of emotions for all of us. So I want to talk about our emotions, particularly within the context of the worldwide stress that we're living now. I was just listening to a video this week of Dr. James Baker, no relation to me. He's teaches at the University of Michigan, and his expertise is in the area of immunology and vaccines. He's been studying vaccines his whole career. And it was very interesting to listen to his video. His take on what's happening with the vaccines is that this is our way of stopping the spread of this virus. He made a couple of good points. We're losing 3,000 people a day dying to this virus. No one has died from taking the vaccine in America. No one's died. So he's saying, in his way of thinking, it's a no-brainer. We should all try to get it so we can stop this thing. There have been some allergic reactions, they think, but people go in the hospital, one day later, they're back out again. So there are reactions, and sometimes the reactions are pretty severe. But that's very, very rare, and the vaccine is very, very remarkably safe. And if you take 2 of them, it's 95% effective, which is amazing. So he just went on and on and on about how those of us in the sciences who are looking at this think that we've got really a gift here that's been given us in less than a year to come out with this kind of vaccine. He's thinking is really great. And I felt comforted by that. So there's some really, really smart scientific people who are studying this stuff and saying, I think we've got maybe a path forward to deal with this crisis. Let's all work together and try to deal with this. Now I know personally some people who are not going to take the vaccine. They've got their reasons why they don't want to take it, and that's their reasons. I'm not going to try to talk people out of their reasons, but I think if you look, you'll see there are some encouraging things going on for us dealing with this crisis. So we're trying to face it. The hard science people are doing their job and trying to figure out what we need to do to deal with this crisis. And then we've got what we call the soft sciences. That's my guys. The psychological, sociological people are trying to also figure out now on an emotional side, how are we going to deal with this? Because the emotional scarring, just like I know there's physical scarring to this disease that's coming out, the emotional scarring is going to last for years. The losses that people have incurred, the loss of income, the loss of jobs, the loss of careers, the loss of relationship. Just the difference now today that you feel, and I know I feel it. When I come to BPC, we're all laughing and I can hear you shuffling in your chairs and somebody will say something that'll make me laugh. And we can't do that anymore. This is very weird. It's very stilted. And yet we're doing our best to try and interact. And we're all going to have to deal with the psychological ramifications of what we're going through now. The crisis that we're in now is real. So that's what I want to talk about today. The psychological effects of the stress. We started off this conversation in November when we were talking about isolation. I spent a couple of weeks talking about the psychological impact of isolation on human beings. It's not good. That's what we do when we punish prisoners. We put them in isolation. That's what we do to punish them. We're all being punished psychologically. And it's very important to understand the impact of what's happening to us emotionally in our attempts to try to deal with this physical problem that we're wrestling with. So I want to make this a dialogue. So as things come up, as we're talking about it, if this triggers a memory or thought or something you want to share, jump in and we'll talk about that. It's okay with me if we get off topic a little bit. We always do at BPC a little bit. Off my topic doesn't mean it's off the Holy Spirit's topic. Maybe there's a different agenda here. So what are we dealing with? Grief, loss, isolation, loss of income, fear, alcohol and drug abuse. I mean, admit it. I know you're doing it. Everybody's doing it. You're drinking more than you used to drink. And probably all of you are thinking right now, I'm a little bit more hungover than I usually am on Sunday morning because we're trying to cope with the stress of our lives. And so the easiest thing to do, you can't go to the gym, right? You can't go out to dinner at a nice restaurant. What do? You're drinking more than you should drink. And alcohol is a depressant. Just want to remind you that. So we're gaining weight and depressing ourselves because we're trying to cope with the stress of our life. I know that, let's be honest. What else can we do? We have insomnia, anxiety. We're seeing these kinds of psychological spin-offs of our attempts just to deal with a crisis in our life. We even now have got, this is new, ready for it, COVID psychosis. Yeah, that's right. People are literally going crazy. Maybe some of you have heard of this. I had a case this week. It wasn't my client, but my client's mother was hospitalized for COVID and literally became psychotic. So what we're finding now is that there are neurological substrates to this disease, meaning neurological problems that happen. The people, they lose their sense of taste and smell. It's a neurological problem that goes on for months, right? Now we're also seeing there are psychologically rooted neurological problems that can happen as well. It's very rare. So I don't think anybody's crazy here today. I'll let you know if I think you are based on your comments. So I'll give you my card at the end of the time. But so far as I can tell, everybody looks pretty normal. But my point is this, is that there are emotional, psychological, neurological problems that we're having to deal with and we'll have to deal with for some time. Cognitive effects, there's fatigue, concentration difficulties, brain fog, they're calling it, that can last for a while after you've had the virus. And as I said, even psychosis, which is extremely rare and doesn't last long. People are recovering from it. So maybe you've seen that. As you know, it's striking people who are older. 80% of people who die of COVID are 65 and above. So some of you youngsters are just entering into that danger age range here. And so we want to be wise about how we're going to address this and the effects of it. We're all going to have to manage our emotions. And luckily for you, I just wrote a book on that. This is called Managing Your Emotions for a Healthier Life. Just came out. Managing Your Emotions for a Healthier Life. Lucky for you. You can get it from Amazon, download it for like $4.50. It's mass market size, it's very small. So it's all about, and that's what you're going to hear today. It's all taken from this book. Managing Your Emotions for a Healthier Life. Why do we talk about feelings? People often ask that. I'll give people Their wives send them to therapy, and guys will sit across from me and want to know why I want to talk about your feelings. What's the point of that? We now know a lot more about how the brain operates than we ever knew before. Daniel Kahneman is reading a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. Some of you have read that, Thinking Fast and Slow. He got a Nobel Peace Prize in economics. He's a psychologist who got a Nobel Peace Prize in economics because he is an expert in understanding how people make decisions. Why do you make decisions? How do you make decisions? And he built some economic models to help people predict why people do what they do, like in the stock market. Why do people invest in what they invest? Why does the stock market go up? Why does it go down? It's largely psychological. Those of you who invest know that. You see that, these spikes up and down. And so he built these models psychologically, helping people understand why people decide the decisions they make, how people make decisions. And in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he puts it very simply. He says there are really two paths of thinking. There's thinking fast and thinking slow. The fast path is automatic. Your brain will make decisions very quickly. You'll meet someone and you know what you think about them. You've made your decision. I don't need any facts. I've heard this person talk for 30 seconds. I've made my decision. I know what kind of person this is. You either trust them or you don't trust them, and you know automatically. That's called the thinking fast track, and it really circumvents the prefrontal cortex. So you're not actually thinking, you're just reacting. That's the fast track. Then there's the slow track, where we're very deliberate, we think things through, we collect our data, we really are methodological about how we make decisions. And then because we spend so time in the slow track, so much time using the slow track, we think that's better. We think, really, I'm a rational person because I spent all this time doing the research. I've looked, I've listened to videos of doctors, and I know what I think because I've researched it. I'm really certain that I have the ability to think things through, and I'm a rational human being. And that Kahneman's point is, no, you're not. Most decisions are made in the fast track. Most decisions are made automatically. They're made intuitively. Most decisions you already know, and then you go do your research to prove yourself. Now, this is very sobering. What he's saying is what psychologists have been saying for decades. You think you're rational, you're rationalizing. You make decisions instantly, quickly, within seconds. You know what you feel. You may not know what the feelings are, but you have an intuitive sense of arriving to a conclusion. People make decisions quickly based on feelings, but they don't know what the feelings are. And then for most of us, we go and do our research to prove what we already knew was true. So you get what I'm saying? You're driven by emotions more than you realize. You think you're rational because you've got the thinking slow part of your brain, the rational prefrontal cortex, the language, the reasoning, the research part, and you spend so much time and energy in that part of your brain, you think that's how you think, and you think that's how you make your decisions. Well, Kahneman got a Nobel Peace Prize by enlightening us all to the realization that, yeah, that's kind of not true. Most of you make decisions very quickly, and then you do your research afterwards. He says this, the way the brain has worked, it gives us the illusion of certainty. The illusion of certainty and the inability to acknowledge the extent of our ignorance. Now, that is shocking because you're all sitting there very certain about certain things, aren't you? I mean, you know, let's take politically. I mean, you're really certain of your political views, aren't you? Kahneman would say, well, you probably have made most of those decisions based on emotions that you don't even know, you haven't been able to name them, and then you've done a whole lot of research to support that. We're basically rationalizing people. Now, we use the thinking slow part of the brain to do a lot of good work, but in terms of our decision making, we're often making those decisions based on emotions that we haven't even identified. Now, John Haidt has made this even more clear. He wrote a book called The Righteous Mind. If you haven't read it, it's very interesting. He's a psychologist who asked the question, well, why do we have such really smart people on both sides of the political aisle, both of which are convinced the other side is just stupid? How is that possible? How do you have these really, really smart people, and they've got all their arguments, and they look across the aisle, they go, that person's an idiot over there. How could you possibly believe that stuff that you guys believe? So a psychologist would be interested in that, right? So he spent a lot of research, a lot of time trying to figure out why people can come to such different conclusions. And they're both very intelligent people. Believe it or not, there are people who are very intelligent who are not in your political party. I know that's shocking to you, but it is true. There are very intelligent people in the other side. We've done this research. We know this. We've done intelligence tests. There are intelligent people on both sides. It's shocking. I know. So John Haidt has done all this research, and it's very interesting. You should read it. I'm not going to go into all of it, but they interpret words differently. Like they'll use words like fairness, but they mean something different by it. And so they've got their own. It's very confusing when they talk because they're missing each other. They're using the same words, but they mean different things. And Haidt makes the same conclusion that Kahneman makes. Haidt's metaphor is this: the human brain is like a rider on an elephant. Maybe you've heard this metaphor before, but this is John Haidt's metaphor. The rider is your reason. He's a little man up there trying to ride an elephant, which is your emotion. And if the elephant wants to go with the rider, then they'll go in that direction. But if the elephant doesn't want to go with the rider, then they're going in the direction of the elephant. The elephant, for the metaphor, is your emotion. The rider, the small man on top of the elephant, is your reason. And psychologically, again, we come to the same conclusion. You're driven by your emotions. When they want to go, you think you're going to stop your emotions from directing the direction of you? His conclusion is no. He makes this statement in The Righteous Mind. Reason is the rider and elephant is your emotions. Perched atop the elephant, the rider holds the reins and seems to be the leader. But the rider's control is precarious because the rider is so small relative to the elephant. Anytime the 6-ton elephant and rider disagree about which direction to go, the rider's going to lose. He's completely overmatched. There you go. What are you really driven by? When things get hot, when things get really important, when you get really triggered, when you're afraid, when you're anxious, what do you think is going to win out? The elephant's going to win out, the elephant of your emotions.
Mark?
Yes, Hall.
Why shouldn't we be just incredibly depressed by this insight?
Yeah, because I'm not done yet.
Well, that may be, but I just want to acknowledge that if the metaphor that the author uses is useful, it strikes me that while you may have, whatever you're going to do in the next 45 minutes, okay? I don't mean to cut you off, but right. I want you to address the I think very natural and almost irresistible conclusion that this is a very depressing insight and kind of is about as counter to, for example, the Enlightenment as we could possibly be. And although you can say, oh, there's hope at the end of the tunnel, just hold on. I just want to acknowledge that this to me is a very discouraging insight.
It is. It is if you think you're a rational person. You're right. I'm shaking fundamental beliefs here. Those of you who have thought, oh man, I make all my decisions very rationally. I would hope that your response would be, oh my gosh, this is important information. I really need to know this. If I thought that, everybody who thinks like me is right because they're just more intelligent, and maybe that's not accurate, this would be good for all of us to take a step back and look at how we make our decisions. Kahneman got the Nobel Peace Prize, not because he depressed people, but because he enlightened them. It was helping them understand how they make decisions. So yes, hopefully, those of you who are ruthlessly rational in the way you go about your life, hopefully this is depressing news for you. Because you're going to be shaken and take a step back and say, wait, I make decisions based on what then? And there should be a bit of confusion when you come to a moment of realization. That's often we find that there's a bit of confusion of, oh, wait, I always thought it was this way.
Isn't there also some evidence that those 30-second impressions have a lot of validity? Or maybe you already said that. Assuming the 30-second impressions come more from the emotions than from the rational mind.
Yes, we talked about that last time I was here. Actually, to make it even worse, we've done a lot of research where we would flash pictures up to people doing studies that would create a feeling inside the person watching the picture. The pictures were too fast for it to register in your thinking part of your brain. So just a microsecond where you could see it, but you don't know you see it, right? And we can change how you feel and you don't even know it. That's how fast the thinking past part of the brain goes. It's registering things that doesn't get into the thinking part of the brain. So we can raise people's fear level by showing them scary pictures that are so fast that they don't know those. It's subliminal persuasion. You've heard this,
I think I need some potato chips.
Yeah. Yes. Monster drink. Okay, now everybody's thirsty. They want a monster drink. Right? Now, that's real. We know this, and advertising companies know this, and people who get you to buy cars know this, and the decisions, we get people to make decisions based on triggering emotions. That's like, this. So any of you who are in marketing, you already know this. People make their decisions based on you creating need in them. And then they feel, well, I got to do that now. The thing you said, I got to go do. I just want you to be enlightened. This is how the brain works. We want to be enlightened, and then we want to know what can we do if this is true about us. Great reactions. This is what I want. I want us to wrestle with this reality. And buy my book, Managing Your Emotions for a Healthier Life. $4.50 on Amazon. All right. So what is this in psychology? What does this lead us to? Well, many of you have heard me talk about this over the years. The latest theories in psychology are very, very different from where Freud started. Freud started the practice of psychotherapy over 100 years ago, had some ideas about how to do it. That was over 100 years ago. Nobody subscribes to those ideas like he thought them. We've done a lot of research in the last 150 years. Now the latest theories are all attracted to what's called intersubjectivity theory. Now, what does that mean? That you are bringing your subjectivity to this conversation, your life history, your beliefs. I'm bringing mine to the conversation, and then they interact with each other. So when we do therapy now, we're interested in figuring out how you feel and how those feelings have shaped what you believe. You're all in the grips of unconscious beliefs that were laid down in your unconscious based on emotional experiences. We call those organizing principles. We all live by unconscious organizing principles that organize our emotional experiences in life. And then that gives us a template through which we look at all of life and all of people. So when I come into this exchange, I've had emotional experiences that now my unconscious, my brain has organized, made meaning of those. And that predisposes me to filter through everything that happens through this unconscious grid. Let me give you an example. That's a little bit, heady. If you grew up in a home with parents who were abusive, psychologically or physically abusive, then you're going to organize your emotional experience. And a key emotional experience growing up is vulnerability. I'm a child, I'm vulnerable. My parents were abusive. What did you learn? How do you organize vulnerability? Well, vulnerability is dangerous. If I'm vulnerable, I'm going to get hurt. I can't trust that the people I'm supposed to trust are really trustworthy. And you just learn that. Nobody told you that. You learn that through life, and it becomes a core belief that from here on out in my life, for me to be vulnerable is really stupid. Because as soon as I feel the feeling of vulnerability, I organize it as dangerous. So the meaning of vulnerability is dangerousness. So then you grow up, you're an adult, you try to have relationships, and you're always guarded, and you're never really open, and you're defensive a lot. And if people get closer, you sabotage the relationship. I'm explaining some of your divorces now. So you really, really try to relate to this person, and they just seeming to keep creating distance in the relationship the whole time. Why would you do that? Why would you create distance in a loving relationship? Because unconsciously, they believe that vulnerability is dangerous. So now this is our thinking in psychology now. We've got to get to what are the emotional experiences that people had, and what are the meanings they take away from those emotional experiences, because that's what drives us. That's why we do what we do. It's irrational, You know this, you've had relationships with people and you think they're just, I can't believe they do what they do. It's irrational. Why would you do what you do? It makes no sense. You're making your life worse because the unconscious always wins. Whatever you learned about your life that now you believe outside of your awareness, you believe that will dictate your behavior more so than what's reasonable, more so than what's profitable, more so than what's going to even get you ahead in life. You're going to default to what you unconsciously believe. Does that make sense? You kind of tracking with me there? And so now you know why therapy can take so long. I talk to sometimes people for years because we're trying to get at these deeper meanings of things. Why are you the way you are? That's why your therapist usually does way more listening than talking. I know you've tried to ask your therapist questions, they don't answer because they're trying to get at these unconscious ways that your mind operates based on feelings. The most important thing you can do is talk about your feelings. If you want to change, you want to change yourself, if you want to become more aware, you want to talk about these feelings. So to live well, we have to learn how to manage our emotions. And actually, manage is a terrible word. My publisher picked that word, not me. I tried to get them to change it. People don't manage their emotions. They become aware of their emotions. They said, now manage is going to sell better. They made it small, so it's supposed to go, this is supposed to go in racks on airports. Nobody's in airports. Can you, my life, right? I know, my life. Really, when I say manage your emotions, I mean be aware of how you unconsciously organize them, but that would be too lengthy of a title, so manage one out. So you're supposed to be what? An effective person, a person who makes good decisions, is aware of how they organize their emotions, aware of the emotion themselves, and then aware of what they mean. So it's a two-part process. For some of us, it's hard to even know how we feel. And then to figure out then the meaning I made of those feelings, that's even trickier and often requires a lot of dialogue back and forth. Looks like there's a chat. Is that a question?
No, they've just been comments at this point. Can I ask a question, Mark?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So it's not always easy, as you've said, for everybody to identify their feelings. And maybe it's one of those things where in order to, before you can manage anything, you have to identify what's coming up or, you know, how you're feeling or what's going on. What are some suggestions you might have, or what's a good starting point if you're starting to realize that emotions are coming up, but what is that first step to identifying what they are, or to even being able to name them, which for so many of us, that can also be a struggle as well. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Well, the goal is awareness. And yeah, the answer is yes, I do. But look at what we're already experiencing here today. Like I'm making the point that you being aware of your emotions is really critical because it strongly influences the decisions you make. And I'm getting pushback. People think, well, it's depressing. I mean, oh my gosh, this is not good news. Good, I would say good. People need first to overcome the shock of the importance of their emotions, because for decades, maybe even centuries, we have privileged reason over emotion. The Greeks thought this, the Enlightenment, especially the French Enlightenment thought this, is that what makes us particularly unique and maybe what is special about us, or the image of God about us, is our capacity for reason. We have thought this for centuries. And what psychology and neurology is telling us now is, well, the brain, now that we can look at the brain just in the last few decades, now that we can look inside the brain and see how it operates, it's telling us something different. It's telling us that we need to privilege our emotions more than we realize. We need to understand them. We need to integrate them. And so what I'm saying is, first we got to get over that shock. Some of us who were raised our whole lives thinking what's special about us is our reason. I remember when I was in college, they had this track. Maybe you remember this, Jody. It was the 4 spiritual laws. and there was a train on the track. You give this people to introduce them to Christ, and it was faith, fact, and then feelings. And feelings is the caboose, and you can't trust your feelings. You have to trust your faith. You have to trust the facts, but don't trust your feelings, because that's the caboose of what makes people. And that was just generally accepted. We all said, well, yeah, you can't trust an emotional person. And if you tend to be an emotional person, someone has probably told you you're too sensitive in your life. They probably told you that. It's because of in fact, they couldn't manage your emotions, so they call you too sensitive. So what I'm suggesting is a cultural shift that is hopefully following science, and the science is we are making decisions based on quick, intuitive, emotional assumptions. We don't know we're doing that. So first we got to get over that sticker shock of, wait, what? I'm more rationalizing than I'm rational. Yeah, we all are, not just you, all of us. So this helps explain some of the divide in our country and divide in the political parties and decisions other people have made in our lives that are bad decisions. But once we know that, then yes, now the next step is, all right, what do we do? You got to be aware of what you feel. And for many of us, that's hard to even identify your feelings.
It makes
Now,
me think that Franklin Roosevelt was the therapist in chief. He his first inaugural address, that famous speech that he said was, that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And my dad was raised on that during World War II, and that was sort of the mantra for the war. But when Franklin Roosevelt said it, he was talking about the stock market. He was talking about the Depression, about how the economy had collapsed. And I stumbled on that when I was looking at how the famous .com rise and crash, if you overlaid the curves of how the stock values went up and came down again, it was almost a perfect match to what happened with the Dow in 1929, which said, well, we're not measuring economics then, we're measuring something else. And we're measuring emotion. And I think what I've learned over time is that emotions are what connect us. And we tend to share, in a group, we tend to share common emotions sooner and more readily than we share common thoughts, common reasoning. We might reason our way through things differently, but our first reaction, our first emotional reaction to a set of circumstances tends to be common and tends to be emotional.
and it is what bonds us together. You're right.
Yeah.
What we know is that you will like someone who agrees with you intellectually, but you'll only love someone who bonds with you emotionally. So the deeper level of connection has to do with a resonance that's emotional, not intellectual.
Yeah. It also causes herd mentality, but okay.
We're fundamentally emotional people. So yes, you're right. It's a true thing, it's agnostic when it comes to morality, right? It's about what bonds us together, and then you see these horribly irrational and bad choices made by herds of people because they feel strangely bonded together in the emotional moment. So we need to be aware of that. So how do you become aware of your feelings? Number one, you become aware of what I'm saying. Wow, I need to pay attention of how I feel. And for some people, it's as simple as asking yourself at the end of the day, okay, what happened in my day and how did I feel? So when I tell people to journal, and I do sometimes say journal, I say at the end of the day, journal what happened in your day, but always say how you felt about it. Don't just say this happened and that happened, and I'm keeping a log of the events of my day. That's not going to help you as much as keeping a log of how you felt about what happened in your day. And I literally have in my office a page of emotional words, of feeling words: happy, sad, glad, frustrated, angry. Common words, we all know the words. And when I would work in person, I would have to hand that page to certain people, say, now talk off this page. Say what you said to me again, but use the words on this page. And I'm shifting their focus to including emotional language when they talk, because most of us don't. The language that we use is very intellectual, it's very rational, it's very mechanical and structured and factual, and we don't include the feeling words. And so, number one, that become aware and intentionally include emotional words in your language throughout the day. And then beyond that, if it's truly bonding, if emotions are how we bond, when someone talks to you, listen not to the content of what they're saying only, listen to how they felt. Oh, that must have made you sad. That must have made you angry. That must have made you anxious, and you give them that. So when you respond back to someone's feelings, it creates a sense of bondedness. You get me, not just intellectually, you get me. This is the difference in psychology, between understanding and knowing. Understanding is grasping a concept. Knowing is an emotional resonance, where I respond back to the feelings of another person. That's what creates that feeling of bondedness. People do it. Some people do it naturally, and you just always feel connected to them. You don't know why you feel connected to them. It's because they're listening to how you felt and they're commenting on how you felt, and that just makes you feel closer to them. And some people are just natural. Now, some of you are what we call highly sensitive people, Hsps. It's actually a thing, and you can't help but know how you feel. You can't help but listen to the feelings of other people. You walk into a room and it feels cold, or it feels hot, or they're playing music and it's just too loud for you. You're just neurologically wired to be a highly sensitive person. There's research around this now. You're someone who is acutely aware of feelings, of everybody else's feelings, and even your own. You're not too sensitive. You're just what we'd say highly sensitive. And it's very important to know this about yourself. That's how you're going to navigate through life. You can be a very empathic, very effective person, but people are going to be telling you your whole life, oh, you're too sensitive. You're not too sensitive. You're just perfectly sensitive for you, but you need to own that, own your own level of sensitivity, and guard yourself, because your people around you might not be as sensitive as you are to your own emotions. It's not a bad thing, but it is a thing, something to be aware of. All right, so.
But Mark, while it may not be a bad thing, and it is a thing that you should be aware of, which
Yes.
are the two things you just said, I think it is also important to recognize that sensitivity has more or less utility for the person given the circumstances. So could be circumstances when, I don't want to call it hypersensitivity, but let's call it acute sensitivity would be very, very useful depending on the context.
Yes.
And other times when it would not, so that it's incumbent upon us to recognize our particular proclivities. You psychologists have much better words for this than we do.
You're doing great. You're doing great. Yeah.
But anyway, my point is that it's not always bad. It's not always good, but it is something that one needs to be perpetually cognizant about or conscious of.
Absolutely. That is my point. You need to know who you are, know what your strengths and weaknesses are in a given situation. That is absolutely accurate. And you could say that same statement about all of us. Whatever your strengths are going to help you in certain situations, and they're not going to help you in other situations. That's true for all of us. And so you got to know who you are and which situations, which contexts you really thrive in, and which contexts you really struggle with. And yes, when it comes to sensitivity and the HSPs, highly sensitive people, it's important. It's very liberating. Usually when we help people understand this, they say it's between 15 and 20% of the population are just very aware of how they feel and sensitive to everything. That's a large percentage of people who are being victimized and told you're too sensitive, you're too emotional. And that is especially damaging, because then if you develop shame about being the way you are, that ultimate, what could have been strength, rarely gets manifested as a strength, because then we become defensive and self-defeating, and all kinds of other problems come with feeling shame for being the way you are. What's important is for you to know the way you are, and then find the situations where you maximize your strengths. But that's exactly right, Hall. We all don't thrive in every situation. We need to know what our strengths are and what our personality is. I'm married to a highly sensitive person, and so I'm often cast as a highly insensitive person because we're feeling, our feelings are very different in any given moment. I really like Bruce Willis movies, and she hates them, and so you got to figure out the differences. Last night I had to watch a Liam Neeson movie by myself because she just wasn't going to watch it. Okay, I get it. That's Downton Abbey is your thing, and I find that slow. And so you learn to appreciate and not shame the other person for being the way they are. Your point is well taken, Hal. That we need to understand how we are and view it as a good thing about you. But there are certain situations where it's a strength, other situations which it's not going to be as enjoyable for you, given your personality. All right, let's talk about managing stress. We all live in this stressful environment. I've said this before, so some of you will remember this, is that we view stress as in a cycle. Your life is active, and if you have an active life, that will produce stress. And if you get release from that stress, then you're prepared for more activity. So there's the cycle of life. Activity produces stress, and then release prepares us for more activity, which will produce stress. So stress is unavoidable. A stress-free life, you don't want it. To have a stress-free life, you'd be dead. So that's not what you want. What you want is a meaningful life with release. So you can see the problem we've got now. We're not getting release. That's why you're drinking so much. Is because we're not getting the release that we need. Our lives are still active. We're still doing this. We're still Zooming. We're still doing things, which creates stress, but we're not getting release. So we're all in this together. I can't go to the gym. I can't go out to a restaurant. I can't go to a movie. I can't do the things we used to do. So we have to come up with other strategies for release, or it's going to backlog and create problems for us. What we say is if we don't get adequate release, if you just have activity and stress, that creates distress, and that creates all kinds of physical problems. That kind of distress cycle creates, the ulcers and the psychosomatic symptoms, and it exacerbates whatever physical problems you had get worse if you have a life of activity and stress with no release. That creates distress. So it's really a more psychologically nuanced view of stress. Distress is dangerous for you physically. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing something. Okay. So let me give you an example. This is a woman who came to see me, very successful executive at a bank, married, happily married. Husband's got a good job in real estate, and COVID has forced her to work from home. And for people in finance, working from home means your day just went from an 8-hour day to a 12-hour day, because everybody can get you. Your email's ringing off the hook. They know where you are. There's no, oh, he's not in the office today. They're in the office every day. So she's working 12, 15-hour days sometimes because she's in front of her computer screen and everybody's able to get her. Can't go to the gym, can't hang out with her friends, can't go to a movie. It's just work 24/7. So she does what the rest of us do. She stays home and drinks too much and tries to watch some mindless TV to de-stress, but it kind of is not working that great. So what happened? What's happened to her is that she ends up fighting with her husband more because little things become more irritating. This is the 4th time today I've told you this, and they're on top of each other. And you add alcohol to that, it gets nasty. So finally he said, listen, either you go to therapy and take a look at your drinking problem, or you're going to rehab, because I've had it. I mean, this is it. Because every time it gets the end of the day and you've had X amount of alcohol, we get in a fight. So I see a pattern here. I don't like it. Either you get a handle on this or go to rehab. I've heard it before. So it's what's happening. I understand it. insightful, hardworking, motivated woman who's trying to deal with the stress in her life in a somewhat dysfunctional way. They go to Santa Barbara, they go to a real expensive hotel in Santa Barbara for the weekend to try and relax, right? Can't go to the restaurant, can't sit by the pool. All they can do is stay in their room and order, room service. So at the end of the weekend, they're pissed at each other and angry because, that was a bummer. We spent all this money to go here and we couldn't do all the things we used to do. So they come home fighting about that, just trying to get a break. COVID is, I'm surprised there aren't more homicide suicides during COVID. So she says to me, she comes to therapy under order of penalty of rehab. I work this hard so that my weekends can be a blast. That was her phrase. I work this hard so that my weekends can be a blast. She drives a nice car. She wears very expensive clothes, lives in the nicest neighborhood. That's all supposed to be the benefit of how hard she works, right? So her focus is on working hard and playing hard. It always was. Now, this is very interesting. Even though after I said all that, I don't believe that she's materialistic, because materialistic people value things. And what I came to see is very common in our culture today. She doesn't value things. She values getting things, right? So what is she actually addicted to? The thing itself? No, she's addicted to consuming. She has a problem with consumerism, because as soon as she gets the thing, she doesn't really want it anymore. She's on to the next thing, right? So I need to keep acquiring things and buying things. And this car isn't nice enough. I want a nicer car. And that, well, okay, I that purse is last year. I need to get this one from this year. And the addiction is really to desire. It's really important to know this distinction. Materialistic people are addicted to the thing itself. And once they get it, they cherish it and they hoard it. And they really, that thing becomes like an idol to me. But people who are addicted to consumerism are addicted to desire. And so the thing itself doesn't matter that much. They tell themselves, I need to get this thing. And then when they get it, it's okay. But what about this? They're addicted to desiring the new and desiring the new. That's a more costly and even, I would say, more pernicious addiction, is the addiction to the desire of something. Because when is that ever done? It's never satisfied. And I have to say that Amazon has us all in their grips. Admit it, you're excited when you get that package on your front doorstep, aren't you? It's Christmas. Like my daughter's told me, you cannot open anything that says Brianna on it. That's mine to open, right? So Amazon has got us all in this, and they're smart about it. That if I order, there are certain things, if I order it today, I'm going to get it tomorrow. And so I'm excited that I'm going to get this thing. And I can order a $7 thing and get it the next day. How do they do that? And they have figured out, if I can get you to desire Amazon, I've got you. You're going to keep going back and keep going back, because there's always something else to get. And isn't it funny that even if it's a $7 thing, you're excited to see it come and open the box? That's the addiction to desire that is making, is it Bezos? Is that his name? A billionaire, because he's got us figured out. I know I can get you addicted to desire. The thing doesn't matter, but getting it does. So we're all in the grips of this consumerism thing. She wasn't really desiring the thing. So what is going on there for her and for all of us? What's going on there? What am I trying to do? Am I trying to get something? Well, now we figured out, no, actually you're not. So what are you trying to do? I'm trying to cover over something. If I have anxiety and I don't have a solution for the anxiety, then my next best thing is to cover it over. I'm not trying to make myself happy. I'm trying to keep myself from being unhappy. Important distinction, because you're never done keeping yourself from being unhappy. If you're trying to pursue something to get happiness, there's an end goal there. I'm trying to be happy, as opposed to I'm trying to avoid unhappiness. It's important to know that distinction if you get in the grips of that, because you find yourself on a treadmill you can't get off of. Why am I never satisfied? Because you're not trying to seek satisfaction, you're trying to avoid your anxiety, which was in the case with Marina.
I got a
Go ahead.
So what's the difference between rationalizing, reasoning, evaluating something emotionally versus intuitively?
Well, I would say those are, for our purposes today, I'm going to make those things the same thing. I'm going to put Kahneman's definition of intuitive in the same box as John Haidt's The Elephant, but they're actually not the same thing. And the science surrounding the nuance, what you're probably suggesting here, is much more than that. But just for our purposes today, I'm making general categories that we're driven by emotions in ways that we don't understand. But actually, the term intuitive means a lot more than that. There's a science behind figuring out intuition that's more complicated. Was there something more you wanted to say about that, Jody?
Well, no, because well, Barry had a question out there or a comment about combining intuition with then filtering things, through rationality, which I think is a powerful combination. But my own life experience is that I've always been highly intuitive, but not too clever emotionally.
Right.
And so I'm surprised to see the two in the same bucket.
Let me read the comment from Barry so that we're all on the same page.
Okay.
He says, what about the idea/process of running our emotions and intuition, once we've made ourselves aware of them, through a rational filter in order to further explore the validity of our emotions and further develop our intuition? Basically, an intersection between emotionality and rationality. Or am I just over rationalizing? With a smiley face.
Well, that's what I love about this group. The questions, you break away the simplistic categories that never work, right? These are just for heuristic purposes and putting things in categories, but it doesn't really work. And here's the answer to that, is that the thinking feeling dichotomy is a false dichotomy. You're always both thinking and feeling at the same time. So it just depends on what you want to look at. Do you want to look at the rational element of this moment, or do you want to look at the emotional element of this moment? But they're always both happening at the same time. So that makes it even more complicated. So I can say, hey, use emotion words, but you have to use the thinking part of your brain to use the emotional words. So it's always both. And in the past, even when we say, oh, the thinking part of the brain and the feeling part of the brain, it's not that black and white. The brain interacts with each other. Now, there are centers in the brain that are more focused on emotion, centers of the brain that are more focused on thinking, but the other part of the brain isn't shut off at that time. So it's always both. And what we want to do is be balanced. We want to, when I make a decision, what I'm trying to get people to do is take a beat, take a breath, ask yourself, and also, how do I feel? So that you're putting both together. So you put them both together.
But are we still stuck? Are we still stuck with the little man on top of the elephant?
Well, for heuristic purposes, if you are privileging reason, which humans have been doing for thousands of years, then yes, because you're not aware of the magnitude of the impact of your emotions on you. I just want us to be more aware. But yes, we are largely unaware. And here's the bottom line. Most of how we've been shaped is by disappointing experiences with our emotions in the past. Things that happened that we didn't like, things that hurt us, things that traumatized us. Nobody wants to think about that. So we try to push that out of our brain. And I'm telling you, those events are still influencing you. You're just not aware of it.
So the point you're making then is that what emotions and intuition have in common is that they both rely on something that we're not aware of. It's a thought process that occurs at a level that we're not familiar or aware.
Correct. It's happening automatically, and it's happening so quickly, 5 times faster than the slow process of thinking things through, that we're not aware of it. We just think it just is. I draw this intuitive conclusion. I think it just is. Well, no, there was a process that got there, and I want us to be aware of that. And it means, for at this point in history, being more aware of how you feel. That's as simply as I can put it, because we've all privileged our rationality, and both have been going on for all of human history. We just haven't known how to privilege and even express and articulate the emotional part of our experience. Does that make sense? It's both happening all the time.
So let's not overlook that the one person amongst us who's responsible for putting rockets up in the heavens, primarily identifies himself as an intuitive person.
Yes.
But that's something that cannot pass comment and radical teasing, Mr. Hahn.
Yeah. Well, he's a very evolved human being. If you,
Oh, certainly.
you know, that there's no way around it.
You can't solve the problem unless you know the answer at the end of the book.
My kids get all their answers from Google when they do their homework. Do you believe that? I know. There was no Google with me growing up, or Jody. We had to figure it out.
Mark, I think another part of it that I'm thinking about as well is the connection between our feelings and our actions. And so it's not, we're all going to feel angry, but it's
Yeah.
what we do with that anger that matters. Are we going to say something hurtful? Are we going to throw something? Are we going to lash out in some way?
Yeah.
Which are not healthy ways to deal with anger. Anger itself is not the problem, but it's how we deal with our anger that can become problematic, and so on and so forth with all of our feelings when we become aware of them, and then we can figure out, okay, how do I act out on this or not?
That's a great example. So maybe that helps maybe make this more clear. Great examples. Anger is almost always secondary to a more vulnerable feeling. That's a good example. So I'm really mad, and I'm going to go and wreck things and destroy things and in ways that are ridiculous and irrational. Why? Because I'm feeling something underneath that I don't want to admit. I'm feeling marginalized and demeaned and humiliated and shame and disempowered, and I can't tolerate those feelings. So what do? I get mad and I go break stuff. And it's very unattractive, very destructive, and extremely important for us to realize your anger, your righteous anger you think is righteous, is driven by painful feelings that you don't want to acknowledge. And if we can get people to be aware of that process, then we can change decisions that we make. Well, we'll do a better job of helping people make better decisions.
So Mark, I had an interesting experience this week. One hurtful and one very positive. And I think it bears upon your point about recognizing the feelings and how to address them. I've been banned from a circulation of a person's very valuable ministry of circulating comics on a daily basis to address a friend's cancer diagnosis. And she just did this to cheer her friend up. She included me on the list among 30 or 40 people. They are all of a political persuasion to which I do not belong. I objected to something and I was banned. On the other hand, I had a great conversation with a friend with whom I feel incredibly safe about our political differences. And it gave me some insights about how those political differences operate. And it struck me as I was reflecting on the conversation that it had everything to do with safety. When I felt that it was safe for me to express this difference, and I would feel neither shame or rebuke in doing so, it gave me a lot more confidence in terms of addressing the difference, as opposed to, I mean, how many times have we all sat down at Thanksgiving dinner only to say something about Eisenhower, only to be told that we're a total knucklehead, just to illustrate an unsafe environment. So I'd be interested to know if there's research on it or not, but it seems to me that what each of us can do is to facilitate safety in those exchanges, and by facilitating safety in those exchanges, make progress seems kind of highfalutin, but at least allows a relatively peaceful coexistence, which in 2021 most people aren't even blathering about.
That is exactly right. And maybe we'll get there next week. But that's exactly right. Like we know that these emotions create bonding, but you will not share the more vulnerable emotions unless it's safe to do so. And so, like in marital therapy now, the emotionally focused marriage therapy, that's the latest iteration of marital science is exactly that. We're trying to make the marital couple a safe haven, is the term for it. If that relationship is safe, then you'll stop being angry and you'll say what those vulnerable feelings are. But if it's not safe, you won't. You never will. And it's true for countries, it's true for counties, it's true for cities, it's true for marriages, it's true for human relationships. And that's a science we can learn. We can learn how to be a safe person so that people can get to the vulnerable feelings underneath the anger and the destructive and the dysfunctional behavior. And that is very productive. That produces connection, it produces growth. We think that's where human growth happens. It has to happen in a safe place to get to the vulnerable emotional feelings, most of which have been hurt, traumatized, injured, and leads to the dysfunctional behavior we see in our society. Let me just close on this thought that I've said this before here many times. Another false dichotomy is, are people good or bad? We tend to think of people different from us as bad. We're good. People think like me are good. They're bad. That good-bad dichotomy is a false dichotomy. What people are relational. And if my relationships are intact, my behavior is good. If my relationships are broken, my behavior is bad. If I've been hurt, violated, then I hurt and violate. If I've been shamed, I shame. So we're fundamentally relational. We need to be skillful at creating safe relationships where people can feel bonded. That produces moral behavior, is safety and emotional awareness. So we're all ministers of reconciliation. You all are. And you all can become safe people where healing takes place and where conflict can get resolved. And it has to do with being aware of the emotional nature of the human being. But I know we're out of time. Thanks for the great questions. I'm always excited to never get to the end of my notes with you guys because they have such great questions and the dialogue is so rich. So we'll plan on doing this again. We have two more sessions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate it. I wanted to read this comment from Nina and Mike real quick that says, the ongoing emotional conversation with the cognitive brain also biases the perceptual processes. So we see, hear differently in the very same setting, leading to different emotional responses and cognitive conclusions. Knowing these processes differ between us gives us opportunity to try and understand and empathize.
That's right.
So
That's exactly right.
yeah, wonderful. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Mark, for teaching us so well. And we will be back together again next week.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.